A United States Rear Admiral screamed into the radio, "This is Ching Chong China Lee. Chinese catchy. Refer your boss about Ching Lee. Call off your boys." His own side was about to torpedo him. It was just before midnight off Guadalcanal, November 14, 1942. American patrol boats had spotted his ships in the dark and mistaken them for the enemy. Nobody had given his task force a call sign. Nobody had told the patrol boats he was coming. So the man in charge of the most desperate naval mission of the Pacific War was shouting his old academy nickname into an open radio channel, begging his own people not to sink him before he even reached the Japanese. His name was Willis Lee, Olympic gold medalist, the Navy's foremost expert on radar. And in the next few hours, he was about to lose almost every ship under his command. 4 destroyers, sunk or crippled. A battleship, hit 26 times, her radars smashed, her radios dead, stumbling blind out of the fight. By 1 in the morning, every American warship in these waters was on the bottom of the ocean or on fire. The Japanese admiral believed he had won. His path to the only American airstrip on Guadalcanal was wide open. But there was one more ship out in the darkness. His lookouts never saw her. She was a battleship that had never fired a single shot at the enemy. Her crew had never been in combat. What that ship did in the next 7 minutes ended an entire campaign. But to understand how she ended up fighting a Japanese fleet alone, you need to know how catastrophically everything fell apart first. By November of 1942, the entire Pacific War balanced on one island. The Marines had seized Henderson Field, Guadalcanal's only airstrip, back in August. That strip of coral gave the Americans air control during daylight, which meant Japanese transports could not land troops without being sunk. Japan had one option left: destroy that airstrip at night with battleship guns, then rush the transports through before dawn. 2 nights earlier, the Japanese had tried with battleships Hiei and Kirishima. The result was a savage brawl that killed both American admirals present and cost Japan the battleship Hiei. An enraged Admiral Yamamoto ordered Vice Admiral Kondo to try again with Kirishima, backed by heavy cruisers Atago and Takao, 2 light cruisers, and 9 destroyers. If Kondo reached Henderson Field, the airstrip dies. If the airstrip dies, 7,000 fresh Japanese troops land. If those troops land, Guadalcanal is lost. The entire American foothold in the South Pacific hung on stopping one bombardment force on one night in waters the sailors had started calling Iron Bottom Sound. Kondo had assembled a formidable fleet, the battleship Kirishima with 8 14-inch guns, heavy cruisers Atago and Takao, 2 light cruisers, and 9 destroyers. But he had made 2 critical mistakes. Kirishima was loaded with incendiary shells designed to burn an airstrip, not armor-piercing rounds for fighting warships, and Kondo's intelligence told him he faced only American cruisers and destroyers. When his own lookouts reported seeing battleship silhouettes, he dismissed the reports. American doctrine, he believed, would never allow battleships this close to enemy waters without carrier support. He was wrong. USS Washington carried 9 16-inch guns, and something that would matter far more than firepower alone. She had radar fire control systems that let her crew aim and fire accurately in total darkness, when no lookout on Earth could see a target. On paper, she was one of the most capable warships in the Pacific, but she had never proved it. Washington had spent the entire war escorting convoys in the Atlantic and Arctic without seeing a single enemy warship. She had screened the disastrous convoy PQ-17, where 24 of 35 transports were sunk. The German fleet never sortied against any of them. 18 months of steaming, and her guns had never fired at anything that could shoot back. But there was one thing no one outside the ship understood. Washington's gun crews had spent those 18 quiet months drilling relentlessly. They could load the 16-inch main battery in 15 seconds. The standard loading time was 30 seconds. And the reason they were that fast came down to one man. At the 1920 Olympics in Antwerp, Willis Lee competed in 14 shooting events and won 7 medals, 5 of them gold, a record for any athlete at a single games that stood for 60 years. At 19, he had become the only American to win both the National Rifle and Pistol Championships on the same day. But by 1942, it was not his marksmanship that made Lee dangerous. It was his obsession with a technology that most senior officers barely understood. The Navy's official historian, Samuel Eliot Morrison, wrote that Lee knew more about radar than the radar operators themselves. He could read a scope the way other men read a chart. He relaxed in his off hours by checking the mathematics in firing table publications. This was not a man who left anything to chance. When Vice Admiral Halsey needed a commander for a night surface action off Guadalcanal, a mission that Halsey himself admitted broke every rule the Naval War College taught, Lee was the only flag officer who understood both gunnery and radar well enough to make it work. But what Lee inherited was not a battle group. It was a collection of ships thrown together in desperation. Task Force 64 consisted of 6 ships, including the battleships Washington and South Dakota, and 4 destroyers, Walk, Benham, Preston, and Gwynn. The destroyers had never trained together. They were assembled 34 hours before the battle because they happened to have the most fuel. And Lee was sailing this improvised force directly toward a Japanese fleet armed with the deadliest torpedo in the world. What followed would be remembered as one of the worst American naval disasters of 1942. 7 minutes near the end changed everything. Just before midnight, Washington's radar picked up enemy ships at 18,000 yards. On the flag bridge, Lee turned to Captain Glenn Davis and said, "Well, stand by, Glenn. Here they come." At 23:16, Washington's 16-inch guns fired for the first time in her existence. Then Lee's 4 destroyers advanced to engage. Within 15 minutes, every single one of them was finished. Preston took hits in both fire rooms. Her stack toppled. She rolled over and sank. 117 killed, including her captain. Walk was struck by a long-lance torpedo that blew the bow off the ship. As she sank, her own depth charges exploded among the men in the water. 80 killed, including her captain. Benham lost most of her bow to a torpedo and was scuttled the following afternoon. Gwynn was hit in the engine room and driven out of the fight. Lee later wrote that the sacrifice of those destroyers was beyond admiration and that it probably saved their bacon. The torpedoes that destroyed them had been aimed at the battleships behind. As Washington steamed past the burning wrecks, a shipwrecked sailor in the water shouted up at her hull, "Get after them, Washington." But losing 4 ships was not the worst thing that happened that night. Not even close. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, hit subscribe. This channel covers the forgotten turning points of military history every week, because what happened next was the moment everything nearly collapsed. At 33 minutes past midnight, South Dakota's aft turret fired, and the blast triggered a cascading electrical failure. The chief engineer had locked the circuit breakers closed to stop them tripping from gun vibration. When a short circuit hit, the locked breakers could not isolate the fault. Radar went dark. Fire control went dark. Turret motors stopped. Radios died. Then, South Dakota made it worse. She sailed directly in front of the burning destroyer wrecks, silhouetting herself against the fires for every Japanese lookout in the Sound. The heavy cruiser Atago found her with searchlights. And then, virtually every Japanese ship opened fire simultaneously. South Dakota was hit at least 26 times. 4 of 6 radars were destroyed. Every radio antenna smashed. Multiple fires. Her captain wrote afterward that the Japanese had rendered his ship deaf, dumb, blind, and impotent. 39 dead, 59 wounded. She stumbled out of the battle unable to see, shoot, or communicate. Which meant that at approximately 0040 on November 15th, the entire American defense of Guadalcanal rested on a single ship. one battleship that had never been in a fight. Against a Japanese force of one battleship, 2 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 9 destroyers. And she was completely invisible. Washington's gunnery officer, Lieutenant Commander Hank Seeley, had been tracking a large contact on radar. But he could not confirm if it was the enemy or the blacked-out South Dakota, which had drifted into Washington's radar-blind arc. If he fired, and the target was friendly, he would put a full broadside of 16-inch shells into an American battleship. So, he held his fire. And every second that passed, the Japanese force was getting closer to Henderson Field. Then, at 0052, the target answered the question for him. Kirishima switched on her searchlights to illuminate the crippled South Dakota, and in doing so, lit herself up on every radar scope aboard Washington. The range was 8,400 yards. Seeley called it body-punching range for 16-inch guns. Lee gave a single order: open fire. Washington's 9 16-inch guns fired a full broadside aimed by radar at a target her crew could barely see. The first salvo straddled Kirishima in enormous columns of water. The second hit. The third hit. And they kept hitting. Aboard Otago, lookouts who had been celebrating suddenly screamed a warning. There is another ship forward of the first, a big battleship. Kondo, who until that moment believed he was fighting cruisers, was shocked. It was already too late. In 2 minutes and 39 seconds, 39 rounds of 16-inch armor-piercing shells slammed into Kirishima. They obliterated the upper bridge, tore holes 10 meters wide through her deck, and punched through the waterline into compartments her damage control teams could not reach. Kirishima's bridge officer, Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi, later said the first salvo drenched the entire bridge in seawater and destroyed the log he was riding in. He felt successive impacts, but could not tell whether they came from shells or torpedoes. The barrage was so intense that individual hits blurred together. Aboard the heavy cruiser Otago, a lookout screamed that Kirishima was totally obscured by shell splashes. Washington's gunners received a report that the target had sunk and ceased fire. 90 seconds of silence. Then Lee, watching through binoculars, saw Kirishima still firing with 3 turrets. His response was blunt. "If you can see anything to shoot at, go ahead." 36 more 16-inch rounds came in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. 2 shells struck the forward turret simultaneously and destroyed it. The last round exploded beneath Kirishima's rudder, jamming it hard over and leaving the battleship circling helplessly. In approximately 7 minutes, Washington had fired 75 16-inch shells and scored around 20 direct hits. Her crew had never fired at a real target before that night. Aboard Kirishima, there was nothing left to save. 2 of 4 turrets were destroyed. The rudder was jammed. The engine room was flooding. Deep below decks, the flooding control officer could feel the ship shudder beneath his feet with every hit while the temperature in his compartment climbed past 45 degrees. The ship rolled from side to side as uncontrolled water sloshed through ruptured compartments. Captain Iwabuchi requested a tow. The response came back from a destroyer. Towing is impossible. The Kingston valves were opened. The crew sang the national anthem and gave 3 bonsais. Destroyers came alongside to evacuate. The Emperor's portrait was transferred first, then the wounded, then the crew. But with 300 men still waiting, the list shifted suddenly. Kirishima's bow rose. The destroyer Terazuki went to emergency full astern to avoid being crushed. The remaining 300 men went into the water. Kirishima sank stern first at 0325, roughly 7.5 miles northwest of Savo Island. 212 of her crew were killed. Kondo's remaining ships pursued Washington. Otago fired 8 torpedoes from 4,000 yards, and everyone missed. Multiple other attacks followed. One detonation close aboard sent a 200-foot column of water over Washington's deck, but no torpedo found its mark. Lee zigzagged through the torpedo-infested waters and withdrew. Washington emerged with exactly 1 hit, a single 5-inch shell in the radar antenna. 0 casualties. Not one member of her crew was killed or wounded. She would go on to serve through every major campaign of the Pacific War and finish without suffering a single combat fatality across her entire career. The transport convoy that Kondo's bombardment was meant to protect was destroyed. Of 11 transports, 7 were sunk by air attack. The 4 survivors beached themselves and were wrecked by aircraft the following morning. Of 7,000 planned reinforcements, barely 2,000 reached shore with almost no equipment or food. Japan had lost 2 fast battleships in 72 hours. Both were irreplaceable. The Japanese Navy never again sent capital ships to Guadalcanal. On December 31st, Imperial General Headquarters ordered evacuation. The last Japanese troops were pulled off the island by February 9, 1943. Secretary of the Navy Forrestal said Lee's interception undoubtedly saved that island for the American cause. Lee received the Navy Cross. Every commanding officer of his 6 ships received one, 2 of them posthumously. He was promoted to Vice Admiral and given command of every fast battleship in the Pacific. He died of a heart attack on August 25, 1945, 10 days after the Japanese surrender. He was 57. He is buried at Arlington. In his after-action report to Admiral Nimitz, Lee wrote something that captures exactly why this story matters. We realized then, and it should not be forgotten now, that our entire superiority was due almost entirely to our possession of radar. Certainly we had no edge on the Japanese in experience, skill, training, or performance of personnel. A battleship that had never fired in anger. A scratch task force assembled in 34 hours. 4 destroyers sacrificed. A sister ship blinded and beaten into silence. And then, alone in the darkness of Iron Bottom Sound, 1 ship and 1 crew did what the entire task force had been sent to do. 7 minutes, 75 shells, 1 campaign decided. Washington came through it without a scratch.